welcome to another episode of On Patrol with the Suffolk PBA. I'm CJ Hutter, the treasurer of the PBA.
I'm Tanner Brandemar, the sergeant at arms of the PBA.
And today we're excited to have Vinny Greco on the show with us. Vinny's a community member here in Suffolk County who does a lot to support law enforcement and all first responders within the community, military veterans, anybody that performs a service for the community. Vinny's always been there to help support those causes. So, Vinny, thank you for coming on today. We're excited to have you here.
Awesome. My dad was a cop, so supporting, the fire department, police department has always been a priority of mine. That's how I grew up. My father was always there to lend a helping hand. And when I took over the restaurant in Port Jeff first, almost 15 years ago, it was Hurricane Grille and Wings. Anybody who needed help, and it could have been just someone off the street who needed a warm meal, my father taught me to make sure you take care of everyone you can.
So, Vinny and I have been friends for about 10 years now. Basically since I became a part of the 7th precinct here in Suffolk County after I transferred out from the NYPD. And from the very beginning, you've always talked very highly of your father and his history as a cop and, how you really, you looked up to him throughout your childhood and even into adulthood.
Yeah. So, people always ask me who my hero was, and I met 4 living presidents. I worked for the New York Mets for 25 years. So I saw a lot of great ball players, and the first answer I always gave was my dad. He was definitely my hero. Like, he just taught me right from wrong, and really to be like, when he passed away in 2005, we were at his wake, and a bunch of people came, and there was a mob of people that was outside down the block. And I went to my mom and I said, Mom, who are these people? And she says, they're your father's friends. So it took me back a little bit. And as people would come up and, pay their respects, I would shake someone's hand and they said, oh, your dad gave me an autographed ball. Your dad brought me a pizza, when we had nothing to eat. And I started thinking about like how many people he impacted, and it was a ton. And I learned from that point, that my father was probably the greatest guy I ever met. And I try to take that into life today, how I run my own life, trying to always help someone out. So, and that's, it goes back to my dad.
So, it's funny how you bring up a story about your dad, how people came up to you and said, oh, your dad gave me an autographed baseball or a pizza when we had nothing to eat, and how he found certain needs and he helped people get through tough times, right? So, like I said earlier, we became friends about 10 years ago, but we got really close right before COVID-19 epidemic hit. And during the COVID-19 epidemic, when everybody was kind of figuring out how to get through this weird time where places were closing down, families were prevented from seeing each other. If somebody in your house got sick, your whole house had to quarantine for a week at a time. You were one of the first people to reach out. And at the time, David San Martino was the 7th precinct trustee. I was one of his delegates. And, you had told Dave, like, hey, these cops that are out there exposing themselves to this illness and they're still out there responding to all these 911 calls, helping everybody else. How much help are they getting? If there's a cop that gets sick or that gets stuck in quarantine, they can't go out to grocery shopping. I want to feed those guys. How can I help? What can I do to help make life easier for all these police officers during this weird time?
Yeah. I reached out to Dave and I said, hey, let me know the first family that needs food. But like I said, it was also anybody who lived in Manorville, a family that had COVID at that time, which was the craziest time I ever lived through. But I was sending food to different hospitals every week. And I, Hurricanes was a franchise, and I went to corporate and I said, guys, I'm going to be sending food out everywhere. And I would just send out 8-9 trays of food to the nursing staff or the precinct or whoever really needed it. Mm-hmm. And that all comes back from my dad showing me his whole life. That's what he did. So I kind of caught that and, went with that.
Yeah, so that's really inspirational because that was a time when people didn't know if this was like the end of the world, right? People saw
Felt like it.
Right. People started talking about like living through a science fiction movie, right? And here you are trying to just figure out ways to bring a little more help to everybody else, figuring out ways for you to help everybody else during this weird time. And I remember picking up food from your restaurant and delivering it to Brookhaven Hospital at the time, to the nurses. And I remember, picking up food from your restaurant and bringing it to every cop in the 7th precinct who got sick with COVID-19.
Yeah.
And you became like a local legend, a local hero.
And we started, back then you couldn't find toilet paper.
Right.
And, I came up with an idea. I said, you know what? I ordered like 3 cases of toilet paper from my distributor, and luckily they had it. And every order that we sent out, because no one was allowed to be in the restaurant. Mm-hmm. So, we had a bartender, 2 cooks in the back, and they would show up. Either we would drop the order, curbside, or they would walk in with masks, gloves, hats. We were like, what the hell's going on here? And I would put a roll of toilet paper with every order. Yeah. And that, we just try to ease what everyone was going through, to like give someone a smile on their face. And food has always been a way, it's like it's like something that makes someone happy. And with that time when that all happened, I only said, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to take care of people who need it now. Because like you said, no one knew if this was the end. It felt like it, but, I said, let's just make sure we take care of everyone we can. And I was never about, growing up, I always laughed at my dad. My dad was, like I said, and when my brother was born, he sold his car so my brother could have like a crib set up in the room. And I was probably, I'm 4 or 5 years older than my brother, and even that stuck with me. Mm-hmm. I'm like, my dad's getting on a train to go in. He was working in Harlem at the time. Like, he gave up everything, for his family, and that's my belief. Always take care of the guy who's lesser than you, and see if you can put a smile on their face.
You know what's funny too? Like I forgot about the toilet paper until you just brought it up to us here. And I do remember helping deliver rolls of toilet paper with food to cops' families. It's so funny how something that we all just take for granted was so hard to come by just 6 years ago. Right. Right. And it's one of those things where it's like, to not have toilet paper, that's kind of a big deal in today's society. And until you just mentioned that, I even forgot about that being an issue 6 years ago.
Yeah,
it's
because
crazy.
Everyone was going to buy.
Right.
They were going to Costco and they were buying like packs and packs of toilet paper, like they were ordering it. Yeah. I used to sit there and like, what the hell's going on here?
People were fighting over it.
Yeah.
They were going like they were waiting outside in the parking lot to steal a roll. And I used to sit there and like, all right, let's figure this out. And I just came up with the idea, and we wound up ordering like 10 cases of toilet paper through that first crazy 6 months. So all that was part of like the bigger picture,
Right. I remember there being social media alerts on like community pages, like, King Cullen in Manorville has toilet paper, or, Stop and Shop in Rocky Point has paper towels. These things you take for granted were so hard to come by.
Yeah. You don't realize how fortunate we are,
right?
But sometimes you look at the little things like that. It was crazy.
Yeah. So, You've done a great job with the community and helping everybody you can in the community. We had a police officer several years ago, Tim Thrain, who got hurt in line of duty and nearly lost his life. And when Tim got hurt, I was the 7th precinct trustee, and you were calling me the very next morning once the news broke out. You're like, dude, I know Timmy from the restaurant. I know Timmy's family. What can I do to help? What do they need? I want to send food to the house right now. I'll send food to the hospital. You were one of those first people to reach out to say, whatever needs to be done, I'll do it. Just let me know.
Yeah, 100%. Timmy and his family come in. They're great customers of mine. My first thought was, hey, they're going to need food. The last thing they want to do is worry about feeding the kids or themselves. I said, let me get some food out to them. That's when I reached out. And that was always the part of, Hurricane in Manorville became like a family restaurant. Mm-hmm. Everyone knew each other. And I made it that way just because I wanted to always help. I remember a pilot from Kabratsky Airport in West Hampton. He wound up dying in a training exercise, and his wife used to come into the restaurant, and my first thought was, okay, how can we help them? It was right around Veterans Day too, so we wound up decorating a table, and in the restaurant, it was a large table, and we had a sign on there. So, and we said, anybody who sat at that table for dinner for the month, we were going to give back 20% of their bill directly to the family. And that was, I always think about, okay, how do I help in some way, some form? Because a lot of times, the society we live in today, it's kind of different from when I grew up. I think there was so much more respect when I was a kid growing up. You saw your neighbor, you said hello. Now you say hello to a neighbor, they look at you like you got 9 different heads.
Right. Oh my God, he's talking to me.
Yeah. So I always remember that growing up as a kid. If your elders were outside, ask them if they needed something. And that was my first thought when I read the story or saw it on the news. And then it's always too how the news contacted me right after the Veterans Day thing we did, and they wanted to do a story. And I point blank told them, I said, I don't want to do a story. I don't need a story. I don't need to be recognized. I don't need a pat on my back. I do it because I want to do it. Mm-hmm. And if I can put a smile on someone's face, that's what I look for. We also work with Stepping Stone, which is a man of a woman, cancer survivor. And I've been working with her for years. And every Christmas time she comes to me, she does a big thing for helping families. And she comes to me with a list of 5 or 6 different families. And, they're on the end of their life, and some of the requests they want for Christmas is they want to be able to go eat with their families in a restaurant. And I've always helped her. Like I would family of 6, and I tell my servers, don't take a tip. There's a family in need. And we feed them every year. Whatever the family she gives me, we wind up taking care of. One of the families we adopted still until to this day. A girl works for me, this girl, Victoria. Her mom passed away probably 4 years now. But when this happened, I saw this young girl. She was probably 12. The husband who was working like 3 jobs, and she had brain cancer. I said, man, it was hard to look at, and put it into perspective. But I went to my staff and I said, hey, we got a family coming in tonight. One of the families, and, we wound up raising money for her. We bought them a day of spa for her and her daughter. We bought a snowblower for the dad. And still to this day, after, she passed, we were still feeding them once a month. We didn't care. We're like, we got to, and they were part of our family. And it's still, to this day, Victoria's in dental hygienist school. I got help from someone I knew to get her into school. I see the dad all the time. But that's what Manorville became, a family. And I tell my staff that all the time, guys, we got to worry about the people who don't have what we have. And a lot of times we all complain, but at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Yeah, totally.
That's a really cool story.
Yeah. And it's so genuine too. Like you've done everything you could to always help people in the community. Every time you hear a story, you're looking for ways to help. And Dave Sammartino, as the president of the police conference of Suffolk County, he's recognized that from the very beginning too. And shortly after the COVID-19 epidemic, he wanted to honor you in a way as well. So he hosted one of his police conference meetings at your restaurant, and the police conference presented you with a plaque of appreciation.
Hanging in a restaurant.
Yeah, for everything you do for the community. So what's that like? For somebody who's always looking to help, very often, you do that without looking for the recognition of it. But for a group to recognize you for your efforts and say, no, this guy deserves some level of credit for all the good he's doing for the community. What's that feel like? What's that like to be able to get a recognition like that?
Tanner here from On Patrol with the Suffolk PBA. Just a reminder to all our viewers to like, subscribe, follow, and share our content across all platforms. It
feels good. When you do and you keep on doing it for people and you get recognized on that day, like I felt, okay, I'm accomplished something, I'm doing something right here, and that's a big part of what I try to teach, my kids, and both my kids are very generous. My son works in a restaurant. He's a hard worker. I always tell him, I said, it's not about always what you put in your pocket. I said, sure, that's great. It pays all the bills. But, if you're helping someone out in that little bit of a moment, that's what matters. And at the end of the day, if you could put your head down on a pillow and go to sleep and not worry and say, oh, did I do something wrong today or screw someone over? No one's perfect. But that's what I came to, I realized at this stage of my life, I'm never going to stop helping people. And I know I can put my head on a pillow at the end of the night. I'm getting old, so I don't really sleep great anyway. But I know I put my head on it and saying, I did a good job today. You know what I mean? And even if it's something small, I'm always looking to help someone out in any aspect that they need.
Yeah. So, we talked a little bit earlier about your admiration for your father as a police officer. And I remember that evening when you got presented with the plaque of appreciation, you spoke about your father briefly to all the police officers that were in the room. And I think it's always nice for police officers to hear, they didn't know about your family history. They didn't know that your father was a police officer. I think it's nice for police officers to hear about the inspiration you took from seeing the day-to-day good that your father accomplished as a cop.
Yeah, he, like I said, even growing up and, I don't think I didn't worry about my father being a cop back then. Mm-hmm. I don't think the craziness of the world today was like then. Today you got to worry about every crazy, between drugs and what's going on in this world. My father went out, he would take the train to work after he sold his car. And I know he would come back at night. Sometimes, I don't know how hard is it for you guys to, when you have kids and when you leave for work. I think it's a little bit different today. But when my father would come back, I never wanted to be a cop. I love that my father was a cop. I admired him for being a cop. And I always remember he never, pay back then was even, I don't even remember what it was, but we struggled. My mom, we didn't have nothing growing up. My grandparents lived upstairs. We lived in a 2-bedroom house. But my father always gave me and my brother everything we could ever ask for. He took us to every sporting event. He took us to every practice. My mom made sure there was square meals on the table. We joke around how we grew up. We grew up in the street. We grew up with a Spalding ball, and that's how we knew at 5 o'clock we had to come home for dinner. And when the sun went down, we had to come back to go, to start studying. And that's the way, it was. But my father being a cop, like I said, he was my hero, and I never asked him his stories of, anything crazy that happened. I just knew that, being a cop, there was also a lot of respect from people too. And another thing I learned from my dad was my father used to cook for the precinct, and he would come back and, make, he would make these crazy things like for whatever he made that day, he would come back. Even though my mom is the cook, my father would make the things he made for the precinct.
Right.
And we talk about that still today. I'd give him some of the recipes my father used to do. And people are like, what? And I'm like, yeah, he used to take eggs and put them in a frying pan and squish Italian bread on it. And, all the cops loved it, So it's simple things like that I'll never forget. So, yeah, no one was better than my dad. Nobody.
So, back when you were honored by the police conference and when COVID-19 was going on, you were the owner of Hurricanes, but you've since switched names. It's rebranded, right? So what's going on with the restaurant now? What are you guys now?
So basically, we opened up the first Hurricane in Port Jeff almost 15 years ago. And we opened up a second one in Manaville. We opened up a third one in Patchogue that didn't last too long. And the food industry always intrigued me. And when I left the Mets in 2005 or 6, I needed to do something. So I opened up a car wash. I had it in Smithtown. I got bored with it. I wasn't dealing with people. I was dealing with salesmen and, dropping off cars. So I was doing all the cars for dealerships before they got sold. Or if they took a used car in, we wouldn't want to detail it. But I took a lot of my what I learned in baseball, and I took it to the car wash. And when I had my grand opening, I invited every GM and every used car manager in Smithtown, which is a ton of dealerships, come to my, my car wash, which was a 3-car garage, but we made it like high end. And what I did was I brought in all the food that I used to use cater for the Mets, because you feed the teams after games. And I went to all my connections, said, guys, I need this and that. I brought in a sushi guy. And I brought in John Franco came down and signed some autographs for me, for the dealers, who was there. The next day, I got phone calls left and right. So I took what I kind of learned, and I used, the stuff I had at my disposal, and we were successful the first day. But I was bored, and it was never like after that, I wound up selling it. Opened up the first hurricane. I brought in 2 partners with me, Tom and Dan Dollard, and we opened up the first hurricane in Port Jeff. And I was like, I don't know anything about this. I wasn't a restaurant guy. I brought in Tom, who was a restaurant guy, and we operated this thing successfully, and we became part of the community. And then we opened up Patchogue Clothes, we opened up Mandeville, and until last year, I was getting towards the end of the restaurant industry beat you up. Like, it's hard when employees, and I said, you know what? My lease was up. I said, I need to make a change here. The guys from West Hampton Beach Brewery, they have their spot in West Hampton Beach at the airport. They approached me and they said, hey, listen, maybe, we could take this over from you, because they knew I was going to be done with it. But the key was for me to stay on to help them transform it, to help them make it a successful place. They didn't want to lose the customers that come in to see me. Mm-hmm. As even much as that sounds crazy, I see the same people in that place 3 or 4 times a week. And I form a relationship, and we're friends outside of the business. And still to this day, between Dave and you guys, you form a friendship. And I finally said, okay, let's do it. So we transferred it over, and then it became West Hampton Beach Brew and Grille. They're going to open up a second one in West Hampton Beach now. That's close to opening. They just opened for St. Patty's Day. One day with only liquor, and it was crazy. So my daughter always tells me, Dad, I thought you were retiring. And I'm like, what am I going to do if I do retire? I always thought about that. I got a great baseball collection. I love to be on the water and fish. But I said, I'll be bored. Right. I just turned 62. And my daughter said, but you're getting yourself more involved. Now you got 2 that you're going to try to run. And I said, man, I'm going to try it. Give me 2 more years. She laughed about it, but it's in my blood now. As much as I wasn't a restaurant guy, I really believe this was my calling in a way, that to open up, feed people, make them happy, and help whoever I can along the way. And that's what I'm still doing. So we're going to try to open this up. My son, who is a big part of us being successful in Mandeville, is going to take the coffee shop that's attached to the restaurant in West Hampton, and he's going to call it Brody's. And it's directly next door. We share the same patio in the front. So I'm excited for that. And I'm excited for him that he's got like a new venture. He's a lot like me, but I think it's going to be exciting.
That's got to be pretty cool that your son now is looking up to you and kind of going into the same business and kind of using you as like a role model for his own future and his own plans for what his life's going to be like. Yeah.
He came up with the idea. He's a big dog kid. He always wanted to be a vet. He calls it Brody's because that's his dog. And the logo was a dog. He's going to have dog biscuits in the coffee shop. But he's also wants to team up with the local shelter in West Hampton, the Bidewee, and every cup of coffee that is sold, he's going to give back to the shelter. So he's doing it on his own, but that's something I think he said, hey, my father's done that his whole life. Let me start doing something along those lines. You know what I mean?
How rewarding is that for you?
Awesome. Like it makes you proud, like, wow. My son kind of gets it,
Right.
He sees me and he complains to me a lot about different things and stuff. But I think he gets it. You know, he understands that this is how I became successful. And I don't live any different life. I don't live in a large house. I work my whole life. I love what I do. And part of it, you know, comes back to me. So that's what he's doing now. I'm doing the right thing.
So my favorite thing about your restaurants is that, and you kind of already touched on it, but you build friendships and relationships with the people that come in. And when you go to eat there and you start to talk to, you know, the customers start to talk to you, it almost becomes like dinner and a show, right? Because you get to start talking about some of the stories and some of the experiences you've had in your life. And you're very outgoing with all this. And you already hinted to it, but you have a history of working with the Mets. And some of the best stories I've ever heard, especially growing up as a baseball fan and now coaching Little League and raising my kids around sports, some of the best stories I've ever heard are some of your Mets stories from when you were working in that clubhouse.
Yeah. I started in 1981. I started working in a visiting clubhouse at Shea Stadium. People always ask, how'd you get a job like that? Two kids I grew up with, their father was, he used to cater food to the players. So in a visiting clubhouse, after each game, you feed the players, the visiting team. And part of the job as a visiting clubhouse guy, which I was when a team flew in to the airport, the equipment would come over. We would unpack the equipment to the lockers, and then we would be ready for game day the next day. And we would, you know, if the player needed something, if they wanted a hamburger upstairs, we run up and get it. If they needed anything at all, we would clubbies. They called us clubbies. And I started it, and I was probably the greatest thing. I worked for one of the greatest guys I ever met in baseball, this guy named Tony Carullo. He was just recently retired. But you got to see every major league player that walked in, and back then it wasn't interleague play. Mm-hmm. So you got to see like the Mike Schmitz of the world, Pete Roses of the world, you know, Dave Parker. I loved Dave Parker growing up as a kid. But you got to see them come in, and they knew your name by the third day. And then the next time they would come in, you know, you had certain things you would do. Brew, one of the greatest relievers of all time. One of my favorite teams was the St. Louis Cardinals. They would come in, and I would, you know, you made your money from tips. And Bruce Sutter wanted a Sicilian pizza every time he came in. So if he was there for 3 days, he wanted 3 Sicilian pies. And I grew up in the Bronx, the best pizzerias in the world. And I would have a Sicilian pie waiting for him when he got off the bus. At the end of the day, he'd give me $100. The next day, give me $100. Next day, give me $100. And I'd be like, all right, this is going to be a great job, you know? And, you know, as you did little things, some guys wanted cigarettes in their locker, so you would have a card in the locker. So it was all those little things you got to do, but it was also like, I was living a dream, you know? Grew up a Yankee fan, and I'm looking around, and I'm looking at the major stars in baseball. And I was a big autograph guy. I would ask anybody for an autograph. I remember President Nixon would come to a lot of the games. And he would sit like right on the third base side, front row, and the players would always, can you get me a Richard Nixon autograph? And I'd be like, yeah, no problem, you know. By the third time I would see Nixon, his security guard, you know, Secret Service guy would say, Vinny, come on over. Like, I didn't have to go worry about, you know, them checking me out. So I used to go up to Mr. Nixon and say, hey, Rick, can you sign these balls for so-and-so? And every time I would bring 2 out, I put 2 for myself in the pile. You know, I was raised by my dad, so I kind of like...
Consider it a tip.
And, you know, so I got a couple of dozen Richard Nixon baseballs still, but that was part of like what, you know, my job was to do all these things, and it was nothing better. And then in 1980, when the Mets won in 86, I was still working in the visiting clubhouse. And the story always was it was down to the last out. The Mets come back, win the Game 6. And Game 6 in the visiting locker room, we had the World Series trophy set up there. And every locker, we had the World Series champ T-shirt up with a hat. We had the clear plastic going around. We had all the metal caps on top of a champagne bottle all taken off. And then that play happens where the ball goes through Buckner's legs. And I remember it as clear as it happened yesterday. I turned around, and by the time that first player walked in, there wasn't a piece of plastic, a T-shirt, a hat, or the champagne, or the trophy. It was all out the back door.
Wow.
And these guys walked into the locker room, and it was like gloom. And I said to myself, there's no way they're beating the Mets in Game 7. There was no way. In my head, I'm saying it. Sure enough, I tell my boss, Tony, I said, Tony, if the Mets are going to win tomorrow, I'm not staying in this clubhouse. So the joke of the story was I was in the Met dugout for the final out, and I ran onto the field, and I jumped into the pile, and my face was the only face you saw clear. You didn't see no one else. Did you ever see it?
I think I have, but let's take a look, and then we'll share it for the audience too.
So, it was funny because people always. So, let me see if I can.
Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah. How great is that?
I write me on it because no one really believes it.
Yeah, right. You look a little different 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll have you send this to me. We'll put it up on the show right now.
So, and I'll show you another one and we had this was on, I forgot, someone just gave me this one too. This was on the mound. That was Lenny Dykstra, Doc Gooden, Rick Aguilera, and Bob Ojeda on the mound at Shea Stadium after we won. And that's me in the background. So you got to realize when that happened now, I ran onto the
popping
field.
Bottles with Doc and
I'm
Lenny.
popping bottles. I'm like, who's better than me right now? And people always say, well, how'd you become a Met fan then? I'm like, it's just because you're working for the team, you're getting paid by the team, you form friendships with these guys. Yeah. What was my choice, Right, of course. I still root for the Yankees, but my blood was then, my money was with the Mets. So when we win the World Series, we're invited to the parade. We marched in front of the team. It was the greatest thing could ever happen. You don't realize it how, when you think about it, so it's 40 years already. It's 40 years ago this year. It's a celebration. It's in August. They're bringing everyone on the field for the 40-year celebration. But in 1986, I wound up getting a World Series ring.
Yeah. How cool is that? This guy's wearing an 86 World Series ring right now.
And that's you don't realize it, even though you never played, you still got all the perks of the game.
Right. Traveling
and staying at the best hotels. We flew nothing but charter planes. I ate at the best restaurants and never paid for anything. So you almost like a player.
Right.
But it's the second best thing.
Well, you're an integral part of the organization, right? You're part of making sure the players are comfortable, right?
100%.
So that they can perform as best as possible. And especially during the 80s. I mean, everybody's heard stories about the 86 Mets and some of the stuff that went on after hours. You were a big part in making sure they were comfortable enough to perform those next days. It
was part of the game how, I always say cell phone destroyed everything we have in this world today. It's because, between kids being on and all day long. But back then, there was nothing. There's no security cameras. There were no cameras. And it was like a free-for-all. It was that team should have won at least another one time at least. But it was partying every day. We used to go into Studio 54 or a Limelight, and I'd be like, what the heck is going on? And you really started seeing the other angle of how sports was, the party side of it. And it was kind of crazy on a lot of levels. When I remember getting out in 2005 and I had a big sports writer approach me to write a book, and they wanted a tell-all book. And I thought about it for a good long time. Mm-hmm. And the money was crazy, and I could have made a lot if the book sold. And then I put it all in, I had a wife, 2 young kids, and I said, man, I'll be selling out now, selling out. A lot of secrets that I saw in my 25 years there. And I'd be worried if someone was going to come after me at that point, because the stories I saw, the stories I seen, it was crazy. And I just thought about it, and I remember if that was my dad. And I asked him, and he's like, are you going to be able to go to sleep at night? I'm like, no. I decided not to do it. So I don't regret it at all because I had friends. You know, some of these guys are still my friends.
Yeah.
So going back to my dad, still to this day in December, well, my father's dead now in 2005, so it's 21 years. My father used to get together the clubhouse guys, from guys who stopped working there.
Because your father eventually started working there too.
Yeah, so he worked for me in the clubhouse for about 10 years. You know, after he retired from the NYPD, he was at the Bronx property clerk near Yankee Stadium. He started working for me in the clubhouse. You know, the players love my dad. My dad was a practical joker. So he would get together and we'd go to a restaurant in the Bronx called Frankie and Johnny's, still there. And he would get all the clubbies together. After my father passed, we call it the Joe Greco dinner. We have a plaque. We still do that today. We just did it again in December, and John Franco and Doc Gooden came. And you see all the clubhouse kids now in their 30s and 40s. You know, we had 30 people there this year. That's what generally it is. But it was and we tell Joe Greco stories, we call him, how, funny things he did. And I look around the room every year. My son now comes to the dinners now as part of the crew. And we tell stories about him. And, and I look around the room every single year. I'm like, wow, my father had, one guy is a Secret Service agent. And he's high up, in there. And I look and say, wow, my dad had an impact on every one of these kids. And the players that come, they do it because they love my dad. And that shows a lot that he's gone for 20 years already, and we still do it as dinner for him. We sit around, we drink, we eat, and we have just a good time.
But think about those names you just mentioned. Doc Gooden, John Franco, right? These are guys who are, like New York legends, and they looked at your father as a friend. Like they want to go to this memorial dinner every year, and the work that you guys did in the clubhouse and the bonds you were able to make with the players, it just shows. You get these World Series rings for a reason, right? You're an integral part of that team and clubhouse.
You get part on, and then you also get voted playoff money.
Right.
So the players get together in a room towards the end of the season if they're going to make the playoffs, and they vote. And they vote on from the ground crew to the cook to someone upstairs. So, in 86, I got awarded a quarter of a share, which was rare because I worked in a visiting clubhouse. I wasn't even in that clubhouse. And then in 2000, when they lost to the Yankees, which is the other ring, this is the national championship ring, which is a nicer ring. I got awarded a full share. And that's like impactful for someone like me.
Yeah, totally.
It's a lot of money. So that kind of changed. I was able to buy a house, and all those little things. But I made my money from getting tipped by the players. That's how, and it was from doing, I always say, between like John Franco, Mike Piazza, Pedro Martinez, Mo Vaughn, those are like my top tippers. And then back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, you would get, they would hand you money. And, Brett Saberhagen gave me a Mercedes as my tip one year.
Wow, that's crazy.
Cool. Yeah, so it was like a 3 Series, and he gave it to me. Dwight Gooden gave me. He had a Suzuki Sidekick, and I remember this because we had a fantasy football team called the Sidekicks, me and Gooden, and Gooden would pay the other teammates for their players. Like he just wanted to win. So we would call the Sidekicks, but he made this Sidekick a convertible, which was the most unsafe thing you could possibly do. You took out all the support in the roof. So, make a long story short, at the end of the season, he goes, I don't want this thing. He gives it to me. And it had like a $15,000 stereo system in there. I was living in the Bronx. No parking, no garages. My neighbor sees me the next day. They go, Vinny, I saw your friends in your car. I was like, what? I go, Dad, did you see my car? He goes, yeah, it was outside this morning, last night. I'm like, it's not there. Sure enough, it was stolen. It was just a stereo system in the car. So I tell Doc, I said, Doc, I'm going to get the insurance money. You want the money for it? He's like, nah, just give it yourself. But that's how, I can tell you a quick Darryl Strawberry story, and people always ask, who's your favorite guy?
I love this, and this is what you get when you go to Vinny's restaurant too, because you become friends with Vinny, and he starts telling you these stories, and it's dinner and a show.
And there's a lot of stories I can't tell, but I'll tell you like the good story. So Darryl Strawberry, in I think it was '98, was going to go sign with the Dodgers, and I loved him. Him and Doc. I grew up same age. We would we had the same thoughts on everything. We were two different people, but Strawberry came up to me and he used to give me this Rolex watch, and he had diamonds on it, and I would wear it in spring training because he didn't want to leave it in his locker for obvious reasons. No one ever stole anything, but he would let me wear the watch, and I would hold 4 or 5 guys different watches, and I have watches going up my wrist. So at the end of the season, he comes up to me and he goes, "Vin, I got a gift for you, or you want the money? You had an envelope of money." And I'm like, "Straw, give me the gift. I want the gift because I'm going to spend the money." So he hands me the gift, and it's the watch. I still have the watch today. Very rarely wear it. And as I turned around, he handed me the money. And that's how Straw was. Same thing with Doc. Doc would give you the shirt off his back, like in so many different ways. And he got in trouble and he hurt his own career. But there was no one better. I never saw anyone pitch better than Dwight Gooden.
He was the most dominant pitcher
in those 3-4 years like I've never seen before. And I've seen, Steve Carlton on the end of his career, Nolan Ryan. But Doc was special, man. He was and he was a kid that would do anything for you. And I remember he was rehabbing his shoulder. He didn't travel with the team. I didn't travel with the team. And he said, "Let's go get something to eat. Call your mom. Let's see if she'll barbecue." And my mom loved doing that. So I was in the Bronx in a row house. And we went there and my mom barbecued.
For Doc Gooden.
We're in the middle of the Bronx. I go, "You want to play wiffle ball?" My brother, me, a couple of the neighbors. Within 10 minutes, there was 100 kids in the street. Within 20 minutes, there was another 100 kids in the street. And Doc stood in the middle of them and signed every autograph. But he had batting gloves on. He had his wristbands on. We're playing wiffle ball in the middle of the Bronx. So that's how Doc was. Like, he would always care. And I'll just tell you, this story just came to me. I had a girl reach out to me last year. She worked for me. She's a nurse now. And she's in a cancer unit. And she called me up and she says, "Vin," and I haven't spoken to this girl in 5 years. And she said, "Is there any way you could help me get, this guy has Met tickets, he's terminal. And he has Met tickets for tomorrow's game. There's no way he can make it. And he wanted to take his kid and I believe his wife." And I said, "It's hard once you purchase the tickets." Long story short, I said, "Who's his favorite player?" Just happened to be, it was Dwight Gooden. So I called Doc up and I said, "Doc, I have a friend of mine who has a patient in the hospital. He's not doing well and the tickets are canceled. He can't go to the game." I said, "Can you get on the phone with this guy?" So I tell Vanessa and she can't believe it. She's like, "No way." And I was like, "Done, this is easy." Doc FaceTimes this guy, invites him to he said, "You got to get better. I'm going to take you to any game you want to go to." And the guy was on the phone and he cannot believe he's talking to Dwight Gooden. This is, Doc hasn't pitched him now, 25 years, whatever it is. And the girl said to me, "Vin, you just made this guy's day, his life. Like, you don't realize the impact." And the guy took a swing like it actually, his vital signs went up and all that. So something as simple as that, but that's how Dwight it is. I could call Dwight to do it at any time, and he would do it.
Phone. Okay. Hello? This is James. Hey, Doc, how are you? Thank you.
You hanging in there?
I'm hanging in there. A little more complications than I thought. That's so nice of you to call.
My pleasure. I'm just letting you know. He told me you're the fan of mine and the best. And I'm returning a favor, Bill, better than yours. I'm pulling for you. Take it one year at a time. You're not alone. we're fighting this with you. I just want you to know that from the heart.
I really appreciate that. I've been with you guys ever since '86 when I was in the stadium when Lynn Dykstra hit the walk-off home run in Game 3. I was up in the red seats and I was jumping up and down. You remember the stadium oscillating that night?
Oh man, it was crazy. You guys, the fans, played a big part of our success with all the energy and excitement you guys brought to the stadium. It was fun in the '80s, no doubt about it.
I'll never forget that.
Oh, it was a great time. So you got to get well so we can go check a game out together. Me, you, and Vinny.
You know, I would love that. I'll hold you to it.
Yeah, for sure. Hold me to that. When you get out and you're ready, you feel strong, we're going to go to a game and celebrate this together, all right?
Thanks, Doc. I really appreciate you calling. It's the nicest thing for my birthday I've gotten so far.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy birthday, too. Vinny told me, enjoy your day. Sorry you got to go through it on your birthday, but everything happens for a reason. We don't see it sometimes, but it'll all work out for you, buddy. Just take it slow and just be the best you can. That's all we can do.
I agree. Thank you so much.
All right, buddy. Enjoy your day.
Have a good one.
All right.
Wow.
Who was that on the phone?
Doc Gooden. Thank you so much. I'm sorry.
You got really close with Doc, so close to the point that I think he was part of your wedding party, right? A couple of players that you were close with.
So Doc, Dwight Gooden, Brett Saberhagen, John Franco, and Wally Whitehurst were in my wedding party, which was the craziest day. We got married at Russo's on a Bay in Howard Beach.
Great place, beautiful place.
Beautiful place. Was my ex-wife's cousin at the time, Frankie Russo, and we sat with him in November, and he said, "When would you guys like to get married?" And we sat with him in the summer, and I said, "Oh, November. In case we win the World Series, you got to carry it on." Yeah. He's like, "What about January?" He said, "I could give you a deal," and he writes it on a piece of paper, and I look at my wife, I'm like, Let's get married in January. Well, I get married in like a foot of ice. The worst ice blizzard there ever was. Oh. So we had a lot of no-shows, and I had a bunch of other players that came and everything else. But the rehearsal dinner was in Babylon in an Italian restaurant, and I remember Doc was my favorite, and he didn't come, and I'm like, where the hell is he? And he wound up, failing a drug test. Ugh. So he never came to the wedding, which, I kind of understood. And even after all that, we still are best friends. And that's the type of guy Doc is. He had so many demons and so many, issues with everything. He's still a guy I could count on. That's the way he was, And when I tell people that, like, he would do anything for anyone, he literally would do anything for anyone.
So, what's incredible is, obviously some of Doc's demons that he's dealt with have been well documented in the media. People know about him, and he's a legend in New York. So everybody knows a lot of his stories. Same thing with Darryl, right? A lot of people love Darryl, but they know some of the stuff he's dealt with in his life too. But you've seen these guys on a personal level. You know these guys personally as friends. The human side of them, not just what people see in the news. So you get to have this totally different perspective on really they're like legendary figures here in New York. It's
really cool to hear these stories because I grew up a Mets fan and I feel like a lot of like the Mets, the things you hear about Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry, a lot of times like what could have been in both of their careers.
Right. And
I think that a lot of people miss like. I don't know how many players are going to go out of their way and spend time in the clubhouse, staff member, go have dinner with their parents, go out in the street and play wiffle ball. Like the kindness that you're speaking that they had and the generosity they have is really admirable.
It's something that people always when they ask me, and I have a list of guys. I love David Cohn, one of my another favorite guy. There are times where people say, "Well, Darryl and Doc, they were drug addicts." And I'm like, how they treated me had nothing to do with doing drugs.
Right.
They treated me with respect. I could count on those guys for anything. So I had a different perspective on it. I knew those guys, they would do anything for you. Like when I would ask them for an autograph, they would sign anything you asked them for. A lot of the times these guys today, it was like pulling teeth to get an autograph. And they always worry about is it going to be sold? Is it going to be given away? What are you doing in it? Carlos Beltran, you would ask him for an autograph. He would look at you like you had 9 heads. Yeah. So, Darryl and Doc and Franco and Mike Piazza and Pedro Martinez, those guys were like, you never met a better bunch, and those are all different eras.
Yeah, those are different eras.
You know,
Absolutely.
but it's, Johnny was always the prankster. Franco and Roger McDowell, those are the guys who played the jokes on it. Johnny was known to do a 3-man lift. And a 3-man lift was, he would set the guy and talk about it. I could lift 3 guys off the ground as they're laying down. They would interlock arms and legs. You put a weight belt on the guy in the middle, and you would literally pick the guy up off the ground and be able to roll a ball. And you would pass around a hat. And if it was you, I'd be telling these guys, anybody want $50 for Johnny to lift the 3 guys? You get double your money back, and you start. The guy in the middle now is like, oh, okay, yeah. All right, I need volunteers who wants to do it. Of course, we set up Jay Leno. So Jay Leno's in there with a camera crew, and they're doing a skit on the Mets. And I never was part of the 3-man left because I see what happens. So they say, Jay Leno. And I'm like, I'm in. I'll be one of the guys. What happens, we lay on the ground, they pass around the hat, Jay Leno sees, and they told Jay the money was going to go to charity at the time. So we lay on the ground, they interlock arms and legs, and what happens is the guys behind the crew, behind the line, they start filling up buckets of anything you could find that's nasty. Tobacco juice, syrup, butter, soda, mayonnaise, ketchup. And they're standing behind him. So everyone's laying like this. We're interlocked. And Johnny goes to pick up the guys, and he goes, 1, 2. The 2 guys on the end roll out, and the guys behind you just throw everything they can on top of you. And Jay Leno was just like, what the hell just happened? So the next day, it wound up going on the Tonight Show. We get invited to go down, and I'm sitting in front row watching Jay Leno be part of a 3-man, a 3-man lift. But Johnny did that to rookies his whole career. And that's how people say, how did the tips work? Why did some guys tip you more and some guys less? So Johnny would stand up in the spring training meeting and say, hey, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, and tell the rookies, looking at the rookies now, the most important guys in your baseball career besides your agent and trainer is going to be your clubhouse guy. Those guys will do anything you need and never say a word to anyone. And that's how, and it's changed a lot now because those other guys like Pedro and, Johnny of the world, there isn't guys who do that anymore. So they don't get tipped like we got tipped back then.
Right.
Getting cars, that's unheard of now.
Right.
So Johnny was made sure, take care of the clubhouse guys. Make sure you take care of the clubhouse guys. And that's how, we were taken care of every year. But because it was about not only the playoff share money, like my salary when I left in 2005-06 was $19,000. I had full benefits, but there was no money. Mm-hmm. I remember Mo Vaughn would come up to me and say, I would go pick up the players' checks every 2 weeks. I'd walk upstairs, bring the checks down, I hand them out to the players, hand them out to the clubhouse guy. And I said to Mo one day, I said, Mo, can I have your check this week? You take mine, let me just take yours. And I looked at his check, his take-home check, and he didn't even play. He was hurt, but he was one of the greatest guys. His take-home check was like $375,000 for 2 weeks.
Damn.
So he goes, let me see your check. He takes my check, and he's like, he just starts laughing. He goes into his pants pocket, takes out change, and he's like, hey, I'll cash yours now. And I stood there in reality. I was like, wow, we don't get paid nothing here. But that's how we waited for the end of the season to happen. So, we got that extra money from the guys. And it could be from, I used to bring, I would fill up a guy's refrigerator before they got home there, from a road trip if I didn't go on. And I would go get the groceries. But that was all part of doing what we did. It was a clubby. Wasn't only a matter of polishing their shoes and cleaning their uniforms and feeding them. It was doing all the outside stuff, which was the big part of the job. And they had to have trust in you. Because if they didn't have trust in you, you weren't making no money. So I was there for 25 years, 20 in the Met clubhouse. I kind of had the trust of a lot of guys. That's why I never wrote the book.
Right.
It goes back to that. These guys could count on me to do anything. And I did. And I shut my eyes to a lot of it. I had probably 7 cell phones under my name so their wives wouldn't hear about it, So that was all part of the little things we did, but it was crazy. But one of the best times of my life.
So and again, without getting into specifics, because you don't want to sell anybody out, right? But I've heard some general stories about some of the things you've done to help these guys kind of get out of a bind. And being able to have a guy like you in the clubhouse that can kind of like fix problems behind the scenes before they make it to the media or even make it to a wife, right? Something like that, being able to have these guys comfortable in their day-to-day to perform, that's invaluable to the organization, to the Mets.
100%. And that's what's changed today. There isn't like that anymore. You know, now they have security guards everywhere where these guys go. Mm-hmm. They don't go out as a team anymore. Back in the day, we went out as a team. My father would come out a lot of times with us. You know, he still had his gun. And, you know, we would be out and there was never a problem. But if there was, we took care of it. You know, we made sure that guy was ready to go play the next day, which is the most important part of, you know, being on a professional athlete. You know, they counted on guys like us to make sure they were, you know, we were covering every track.
Right.
And there were tracks we covered. But it's, you know, when I think about it, I didn't do nothing illegal. I just made sure that they were ready to play the next day.
You lowered their stress level.
100%. And that'd be from going to find girls in the stands to bringing them downstairs for them, you know. It was
consulting girl.
Consulting thing. But that was, you know, I look back at it and, you know, when I tell you a story in a restaurant, I'd be like, there's so many different stories you could tell. And when ESPN did the 30-30 at my restaurant, they were looking for the juice of the stories. And I told them some of the juice, but there was also stuff I knew I couldn't tell just because I was sworn. I took an oath almost. Like, it's never going to leave me out of where the public would become, because that wasn't the right time to do that, you know. But I saw my share of craziness that went on in, you know, professional sports.
All right. And the players trusted you to keep some of those secrets, and they trusted you to look out for their well-being. And I think that's why these guys who were like A-list celebrities of the day, you know, befriended you, all right? You know, a normal dude who grew up in New York, who's just working hard, but looking out for their best interest. I think a lot of people, any human being, any man is going to recognize that most of the time. And I think that's why you're able to befriend a lot of these guys.
100%. You know, it goes back to what my father told me. And, you know, put your head on the pillow, make sure you go to sleep at night. Mm-hmm. If you could do that, you're ahead of the game. And that's what I made sure I did. I made sure I did right by all these guys, you know. And there's a lot of guys I didn't like. You know, I wasn't a big fan of Ron Darling. He still owes my brother like $800 to bring you know, like I said, we would go upstairs and get food for the players. And he had a tab. If you could ask my brother still to this day, he'd be like, yeah, Ronnie still owes me $845. He knows the exact amount. So it's those things. You know, Gary Carter, I love one pure gentleman of the game, and I don't know if you could tell this when this airs, but Gary Carter used to sneak up behind me and go between my legs, and literally, he had the biggest hands I've ever seen. He was a catcher, and his hands were tremendous. And he would actually grab my cojones and squeeze him till I said he was the greatest catcher to ever play. Jeez. That's the God's honest truth. And because I would joke around, like when he wasn't around, when I see him in front of me, I'd be like, kid, you couldn't shine Johnny Bench's shoe. And he would build us up, and I would bring up a different catch every week, and he would get me all the damn time.
And that's a guy who had a squeaky clean reputation.
And he was like, you know, we joke about it, and when he passed, I was like, wow, you know, you lost a big part of that 86 team. Was him and Keith, they were the leaders. And that's the reason why the Mets won once they made those two moves. But Kid was like, that team was unbelievable. Like, it was fun to be around. They were so many different personalities going on there. You know, you had, you know, from, you know, Wally Backman to Lenny Dykstra to Ray Knight, Rafael Santana. Like, I still picture him playing, you know. In my head, I still see everything about what happened there, you know, from us winning it to traveling, when they had the cake fight on the plane, and when they got off the plane, they came into that clubhouse stained with alcohol, cake, food. That team was insane, and you think about it, you wonder why they never won again. They should have beat the Dodgers in '88. We didn't. But that was probably the most fun I've ever had in my entire life. Wow. And the friendships you create from that, they're lasting. It didn't stop. I'm out of the game almost 20 years. And I still talk to a lot of these guys. I went to see David Wright for his retirement this year. And I was on the field, and he was in the golf club.
They retired his number.
This year. I don't go to a lot of Met games. The whole traveling in there, but I go. And David Wright was on a golf cart driving around, and he was coming towards me, and the golf cart was like from me to you, and he turns over and looks at me, Vinny, and the golf cart stops, came over, gave me a hug, and it went carried on. And that's a guy, once again, I only saw him for 2 years. He was a rookie before I left. And I remember David Wright, funny story was, everyone told David Wright I was a scratch golfer. I never played, I played miniature golf. So David Wright's and he was a big golfer, and he's like, let's play for money. And I'm like, and now word is getting around. I even had Jeff Wilpon, the owner, telling him that I graduated at a top, I forgot the college it was. And now David Wright's in a complete panic 2 weeks after we're playing the next day. And he's like, wait a second. I don't know, what do you want to play for? And then the money kept on going down. And the player's like, oh, he's he's scratch 8. And so now I forgot what player gave me his golf clubs. And I'm like an $8,000 set of golf clubs. And I walk in the clubhouse. Meanwhile, the club was twice the size of me. So realistically, I would never be able to use them. And he sees my clubs now, and he's like, holy shit, you really do play. And he winds up canceling, and I wound up getting a $200. He wound up paying me the $200 for not showing up fee. And then he found out it was a joke.
Oh, that's
and he was like, are you kidding me? I bought it for 2 weeks. But that's, the funny things we used to do. Tell you another, as my stories come to my head. Rick Aguilera and Bob Ojeda would go out fishing. We were in, spring training site was in St. Petersburg. And he would go, they would fish every day. And every day, next day I'd see him. I'm like, you guys catch anything? No, we got nothing. I'm like, you guys using hooks? I used to abuse them. So they finally got fed up with me, and they wound up catching a fish. And at that time, we stayed in the spring in Alliant Stadium. We stayed in the complex. That's where we had the Mets were kind of cheap back then, and we stayed in this trainer's room. We had cots. So I'm out, come back in, couple of drinks. We had dinner. I go to put my bed down, and there's a fish just chopped up in my bed. And there was a sign, a note from Aguilera and Ojeda. I'm like, these son of a bitch. Now, there's no washing machine. Where am I going to sleep now? Take my sheets, throw them in the garbage. The next day, they have a golf tournament, the team golf tournament. So I get Ojeda's keys and Rick Aguilera's keys, and I go in their cars, and I take out all their golf balls, and I put hard-boiled eggs in their bag. So they go play, and we're all there. And all I remember is I was 6 holes away, and all I hear is Ojeda, Greco! Enough's enough, no more. They said he was reaching in his bag and was just pulling out hardball after hardball egg, and just throwing it. So the next day they come up to me and I go, okay, no more. Okay, you won. We're not going to play anymore. I said, well, it was the Bronx in me. All right, now it's over. Okay. So, you start thinking about all the crazy stories, and some of the funny ones, and that's some of them. It's all that crazy stuff we did.
I love that too. How as we're talking here, and I've heard some of these stories already, but like that's a new story. Yeah, that one's one I haven't heard before. So I love how different things just always come to your mind about some of your stories with these guys that everybody's known of.
I'll tell you another Dwight Gooden story.
As Anthony's still fanning the cameras so they don't overheat.
So Dwight Gooden, my son was in first grade at Eastport. And he had to do a story on who he looks up to or his favorite person in New York or whatever it was. It was a report. My son hated baseball, and I realized still to this day is because I was never around. I think he just hated that I was working for the New York Mets and I wasn't there.
Daddy away.
He never wanted. He played soccer. He played whatever he could play. He never played baseball. Which at that time, who cared? I didn't care. And he comes home and he goes, "I want to do the story of Dwight Gooden." I was like, "What?" He knew I loved Doc. So he goes and gets a book in the library on Gooden and starts doing this report. So I tell Doc, "Hey, my son's doing a report on you," who his favorite person in New York is. So Doc, the report, he has to present the report to the class. I set it up with the teacher. Doc winds up calling the classroom and speaking to the class.
Oh, that's great.
So now, most of these kids don't know who Dwight Gooden is, but it was still the fact that he did that. And he's talking to the kids on my son's report. Like, "Hey, I'm number 16. And these kids in the locker room were like, "What?" They went home to tell their parents. I had parents come up to me and tell me, "Oh, that's unbelievable." But that's another story. I keep on going back to Doc, but that's how Doc was.
If I got an A+ on that project.
Yeah, he passed.
And Doc's still one of your great friends. I know that, a year or two ago, you had Doc at your restaurant.
At the restaurant?
Yep. I went there with my family, and we were just sitting down having dinner with Doc while he was signing autographs and meeting everybody else.
So it was a spur of thing. Like, we didn't plan it. We didn't advertise it. He came out. He said he was getting there at 3. Showed up at 5:30, but that's Doc. He came in, sat down. He was there for a good 5 hours. He signed every possible autograph he can. And when I tell you some of the stories, that's just in how he is. There were 2 kids who just lost their father, and they were talking about how his father, their local Manville kids, they loved Doc. I loved Doc growing up, and they were like, Doc went out to his car and got 2 of his jerseys and brought them in for these 2 kids. That's how Doc is. Yeah. There was a girl online who played softball for the high school, and she had a Pete Alonso jersey on, and Doc said, "Hey, who's your, you like Pete Alonso? What about me?" And the girl's going to know who Doc Gooden is. And Doc says, "Hold on." He takes his phone and FaceTimes Pete Alonso and makes this girl talk to Pete Alonso.
That's great.
You start, that is like stuff that never happens. You know what I mean? But that's Doc. Doc is nobody better. There really wasn't. And people, I still tell it, and like you said, well, Doc and Strawberry, you hear so many of the stories. You never really heard anything about them like this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Those how good of guys they were.
Right.
And that's the truth. A lot of these guys have those kind of stories, but you never hear it. Right. You hear always the bad stuff, but man, that was a good time.
It makes you wonder too, like, those guys had so much potential. Like Darryl was being compared to Mickey Mantle, right? Because he's this new up and coming phenom in New York City, right? And Doc Gooden was for a period of like 3 years was probably the most dominant pitcher a lot of people have ever seen, right? And as a teenager, I think he saw the All-Star game as a 19-year-old, right? So these guys that had all this potential. Do you think, from like an insider's view, that having that kind of pressure as a teenager led to some of the demons that they were dealing with throughout their lives?
100%. You got to realize something. Doc and Darryl came from 2 not great neighborhoods.
Right.
In Tampa and Darryl was in L.A. Rough neighborhoods. Family had no money. They come to New York, and now you're going out to the top restaurants, top clubs. You're paying for nothing. So, someone gets in their head and the back of their ear, it's easy to just say, "Oh, okay, maybe this is the way to go." Mm-hmm. And, they both know that. Darryl does, he's a minister now.
Yeah, it sounds like he's doing great now.
To have turned his life around.
Yeah.
Doc, for the last 4 or 5 years, has really turned his life around. But it still goes back to what if? What if they didn't get involved with drugs?
Right.
Darryl Strawberry is a 500 home run hitter. Not even a question. Doc got close to 200 wins and didn't have half of his life.
Right.
Pitching if he was, suspended or what. So can you imagine if they were both healthy? Like it's really, the numbers would be scary.
Yeah.
I got an interesting story on Darryl Strawberry because he used to go to when I was younger in college and a little bit after college. I lived in Queens, so I grew up a big Mets fan. We were like a 10-15 minute train ride to the stadium. So we used to go to the games all the time. And this one time we're down there. Darryl Strawberry used to go to a lot of the games still after he played here. So I go to a couple of my buddies I'm with. I'm going to try to shake Darryl Strawberry's hand. I'm like, I'm just going to try and see what happens. So he was very friendly with everybody over there. He never said no to anybody really. So I timidly try to shake his hand when I'm younger, and he walks right past me. My friends are just laughing at me. And I try to shake his hand. But it was cool seeing him at all the games. I know, and people
still to this day,
to mob him down there. But he was always nice to all the fans down there. But that was a funny story I thought I'd share.
But he was putting himself in a position where you even felt like it was a possibility you would shake his hand, right?
Yeah.
A lot of superstars wouldn't even put themselves in that position.
They would have 3 guys in front of you to
Right.
when you know.
Right.
Back then, you don't even have bodyguards and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
You just went about your business. You went out to the same restaurants where most people go out, and that's what you did. But if I was out there with my family, if we were in spring training and a player walked in and I was sitting at a table with my wife and 2 kids, I never paid a bill. Mm-hmm. They would say, "Oh, what's the name got it for you?" That's how, it was. And they were just regular guys at that point, Yeah. It was part of, how I really looked at it and how it changed. When you're a baseball fan, it's a lot different. When I went in there, when I first started as a fan, I would look around, I'd be mesmerized. Oh, man, Pete Rose. Oh, my God, that's this and that, and you start seeing all these guys, and you're like, then you realize they're just regular guys.
Yeah, right.
They're calling you by your name. And, you're like friends with them, even though you saw them 6 times out of a year. They would see you the next year. I'll tell you a crazy Tommy Lasorda story. So Tommy Lasorda managed with the Dodgers. He was crazy. He was funny. He was loud. Jay Johnstone played for the Yankees, a pitch hitter, real good pitch hitter. Played for both the Dodgers, Yankees. Tommy gets his cheesecake from this place in Brooklyn that's famous. And it's in a cooler. And they're traveling to go back to L.A. Jay Johnstone comes in and he goes, "Hey, you want a piece of cheesecake?" So I was like, "All right, I'll take a piece." He takes it out, puts it on the counter, cuts me a slab, put it in my plate. He goes, "Just go tell Tommy." He loves when he hears how good this cheesecake is. I'm a kid. Walk in there, and he's doing an interview with 4 reporters, and I take the cheesecake. I already have half of it missing. And he has glasses on, and I still remember it happened yesterday. He's like, "You motherfucker! Get the fuck out! Is that my fucking?" And now I'm scared. I walk out of his office. I'm walking into the clubhouse. Everyone's just laughing at me because it was set up. And he's cursing at me for a half an hour. He didn't leave me a tip. He didn't give me a tip when he left. The next time the Dodgers came in the following year, he comes in, he goes, "Don't ever fucking touch anything I own again." I was like, "Oh, okay." But Jay Johnstone would set me up.
Oh, that's great. I love little stories like that. It's so cool to hear that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. How many kids in America grew up wanting to be a professional baseball player, right? Wanting to know what it's like to hang out in the clubhouse in the locker room, right? And you got to have that experience as a clubhouse attendant.
You didn't realize how much you were part of the daily life of being a major league ball player.
Yeah.
We got, like I said, we traveled the way we lived. I drove around in nice cars. I stayed at their houses a lot of times if I didn't travel. And I would stay at their houses. I'd get the keys. I would have parties at their houses. It was like I was a kid growing up from the Bronx, and I was in a 12,000 square foot home in the middle of Shelter Rock Road. Like, that was unheard of, you know. And I would tell people, and be like, yeah, whatever, you know what I mean? And then they would really see it, and I'd be like, yeah. So going back, I told you David Cohn. I just thought of another story. I don't know if I ever told you this.
I love this.
David Cohn was definitely one of the craziest guys I ever met. One of the best guys I ever met. He would. So Brett Saberhagen had a house in Babylon, right on the end of the street. It had a big, like 200 feet of bulkhead, long dock. And I used to keep my crab traps out there. So I would, load up the traps with bait, and I put them out, and I get crabs, and I would make a crab boil for the players. They would come in, they were on the road or from that night, and I would, make potatoes, corn, shrimp, and I put it in this big pot that I got from Louisiana where Wally Whitehurst lived. And Wally got me this pot because I wanted to start doing boils. When I went to New Orleans, it was the best food I ever had. So I get this massive pot. So I would feed the players, and the pot's sitting in my locker. We'd, Brillo would clean it out. And Coney comes up to me and he goes, hey, did you clean the pot? He goes, it stinks still. I'm like, yeah, I cleaned it before. Go there, it's the end of the night. I take the lid, I look on it. Coney takes a shit in my pot. So I'm like, this son of a bitch. So he's now laughing, and he apologizes, buys me a new pot. I'm like, I got to get this guy back now. So Coney, then I said, all right. So fast forward a couple of weeks. It's in August. He had a Ford Explorer. I happen to collect some turd, put it in a box, put a pair of gloves on, get the keys in his car.
Was this human turd?
Human turd. I ain't going to say whose, but I go out to the parking lot, open up his Explorer, and I put it on his brake pad. And it's like 100 degrees. It's there for 5-6 hours now. He leaves. All the clubhouse guys run out behind a dumpster. And you see him literally hit the alarm, open up the door, and he's like trying to figure out what the smell is. But we played at Shea Stadium. It was dumps. Gets in his car. We see the brake light go on, and he knew right then and there. He opens up the door, and we just start laughing. He starts chasing after. Ran in the clubhouse, shut the door, closed. And he's like, all right, that's it, no more. But Coney was crazy. He was one of the funniest guys I've ever met. But a generous guy, too. Another great guy.
Right, and stuff like this is all in good fun. It's I love hearing stories like this. I've heard stories on some like shows out there, whether it be on MLB Network or ESPN, where it's like even like in the Atlanta Braves locker room, Chipper Jones is a rookie, and Greg Maddux comes into the shower with him. He's telling him, "Oh, what a great job you're doing. You're a rookie. You're really handling yourself well." And then a bunch of other guys are watching this occur, and Chipper realizes they're laughing. And the whole time, Greg Maddux is giving Chipper Jones his mouth. He's pissing on his leg the whole time in the shower.
100%. 100%. And that's what, all those little antics. Like Brett Saberhagen was another crazy guy. Saberhagen and Coney would be in the dugout, and they would try to do the grossest thing to each other. And they would take a booger, put it on his uniform pants. They would try to throw up on each other. And I used to sit there like, these are grown men, you know what I mean? But that's how they were. It was just part of being normal, you know what I mean? And that's, those guys, they were another two great guys. Funny as hell.
So, Vinny, I could talk about this stuff all day. I love these kinds of stories. Anthony's over here fanning our cameras because they're about to overheat. Before we wrap up, why don't you tell everybody a little bit more about West Hampton Beach Brew and Grille, where you're located, and when can they come see you? Maybe hear some stories in person.
Listen, you show up there, I'm telling you stories that we can't tell on the camera. Yeah. So we'll sit down and have a beer. We're located in Manaville, 496 County Road, 111 in the CVS Shopping Center. Real nice size restaurant, big square bar. We got great food there. We use a local butcher, Justin's Chop Shop from Moriches. Since April, we sold almost 13,000 hamburgers. which is crazy. But we have anything from salads to wraps, bunch of appetizers, cold beer, any drink you want. Great staff. Most of my staff has been with me for 10 years now. So everyone knows everyone in there. But stop on down. We have great specials. Monday nights, I do a burger and beer for $15. Tuesday, I do Taco Tuesday. $4 tacos, $4 margaritas. Wednesday, I do dollar wings, 50-cent boneless, which you can't get anywhere. Thursday, we do half off apps and half off martinis. Sunday, when football's on, we have great specials. We probably got 15 TVs in there. It's just a fun place to come to. We're going to open up the second one in West Hampton Beach, formerly Daphne's, which is probably 2 to 3 weeks out. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it's a great place, great spot to bring the family, great spot to hear some stories. Great spot to hear some stories.
100%. Yeah. If you see this, the pod, come down and say you saw it and you want to hear some more, and I'll tell you, I got tons more for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Vinny, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate the talk, and I'll see you at the restaurant again soon.
100%. I'll always support the black and blue.
Awesome. Thank you.
Kids.
Vinny, what are you doing stinking up my stuff?
These things are magic, Mikey.
Anybody can hit in these. Anybody, huh?
The new MLB Authentic Collection Performance Batting Practice Jerseys and Caps are here. Now anyone can get them.
Just a quick message to our audience out there. Please remember to like, share, follow, and subscribe. It really helps our content reach more people, and it adds to our algorithm. Thank you.